How a high-value woman haunts a man's shadow for years, Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why a man can meet dozens of faces after you, yet a certain quiet unease follows him into every room as if a candle once lit in his psyche refuses to blow out? In Jungian terms, the high-value woman becomes a living emblem lodged in his shadow, the part of him he avoids, denies, or ignores. She isn't chasing him in the world, she's inhabiting him from within. She lingers not as a memory, but as an unanswered question. What did she embody that he failed to claim in himself? What dignity, what restraint, what rare silence did she carry that exposed how noisy his desires had become? She is the woman who does not bargain with her worth. She walks as if her soul is already paid for, and this unsettles a man who measures everything in transactions, attention for attention, affection for certainty. He tries to place her on the shelf with the others, but the shelf bends under the weight of meaning. You know the type, the woman who speaks sparingly, refuses needless drama, and leaves a room with nothing to prove. She does not entertain a man's performance, she reveals it. Under her gaze, he sees the split between his persona, the polished mask, and the unintegrated hunger underneath. He feels suddenly transparent, and transparency terrifies those who live on applause. In Jung's language, she constellates his anima, the inner feminine that governs feeling, value, and relatedness. If a man has exiled his anima, mocked his tenderness, disowned his longing for depth, he will project it onto her and call it fate. He thinks she is the missing piece. But she is not a piece, she is a mirror. She does not complete him, she confronts him. When she sets a boundary, he hears a refusal. When she maintains mystery, he calls it distance. Yet what he calls distance is presence with herself. The more she chooses herself, the more his unchosen self stirs like a restless animal at night. Most people chase the image that flatters their ego. She nourishes the image that educates it. She will not be seduced by potential, excuses, or patterns dressed up as passion. You have seen this, how a man tests a woman with subtle disrespect, then studies her reaction as if it were a weather report. The high-value woman does not storm. She does not plead. She does not audition for the role of cool girl or therapist. She lets his test define him, not her. This is not coldness, it is ethical self-respect. It is the Stoic posture that Seneca would admire, value first, outcome second. For such a man, the haunting begins the moment she refuses to become supply. He may not notice it at once. At first, he feels rejected and searches for replacement, equivalence, an easier echo. He can find bodies, but not the atmosphere. He can find affection, but not the altitude. Because what haunted him was not her availability, it was her alignment. She had a center. In her presence, his chaos knew it was chaos. Without her, the chaos can pretend again, but the pretending is thinner, the parties louder, the mornings flatter. He is tempted to call her difficult. In truth, she was difficult only for his illusions. You might wonder why she affects him more than the woman who adored him loudly. Because loud love can be consumed, aligned love must be met. She did not demand that he change, she simply stood where her self-worth required her to stand. That posture is a riddle. It asks, without words, will you rise, or will you resent? Jung would say the psyche cannot unknow what it has seen. Once a man glimpses a woman who refuses to abandon herself, his unconscious registers a new standard. Every future encounter is measured against that calibration, even if he swears otherwise. In modern psychology, this is the end of trauma-coded attraction and the beginning of value-coded attachment. She does not numb him, she awakens him. An awakening can feel like loss to the part of him addicted to chaos. He may negotiate again, then perform a final, theatrical withdrawal. But even in distance, the haunting continues, because he cannot exile what lives inside him now, the model of a woman who will not betray herself to belong. Her absence becomes a teacher. Her silence, an altar. He curses the lesson, then studies it at 2 a.m., when pride is tired. You, listening, may feel the pull to soften your standards to avoid being remembered as the one who got away. Resist that smallness. Let him remember. Let him be changed by memory. A high-value woman does not fear being unforgettable, she fears betraying her essence. She practices the disciplined tenderness of someone who can love deeply without leasing out her dignity. She knows that attention without accountability is a sugar high, and she will not live on it. She does not threaten to leave, she simply stops participating where respect is not reciprocated. What haunts him, finally, is her economy of self. She invests in what grows. She withdraws from what drains. She forgives without re-enlisting. She smiles without promising. She chooses calm over conflict, clarity over chaos, and commitment over charisma. In her wake, a man is left with the ledger of his own soul. He can ignore it, but the numbers do not change. He can distract himself, but the music is softer now, the applause smaller. Somewhere in his shadow, a woman stands, not to scold, not to save, but to symbolize the life he could begin if he integrated what she mirrored. What unsettles him most is not her distance, but her serenity. Chaos cannot negotiate with composure, it tries to provoke it. He may alternate between charm and criticism, breadcrumb affection and calculated withdrawal, as if intensity could counterfeit intimacy. Yet her equilibrium does not flinch. This is where the psyche begins to split, the persona still plays smooth, but the shadow knows it's been seen. Jung spoke of enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposites when pushed to extremes. The very effort he uses to control the bond becomes the force that exposes his lack of inner control. He meets a woman who is not moved by theatrics, and his theatrics turn inward, becoming anxiety. Her boundaries are not fences, they are architecture. They communicate order without needing explanation. When she asks for clarity, it is not a trap, it is a map. If he offers ambiguity, she responds with pace, not punishment. Pace is her secret weapon. She refuses urgency that is borrowed from fear. You can feel the difference, pressure wants a decision, wisdom wants a direction. She chooses direction. In that choice, projection starts to crumble. He can no longer deposit his disowned needs into her and demand interest. She will listen, but not sponsor. She will empathize, but not absorb. Compassion, for her, is not a flood, it is a river with banks. Notice how quickly contempt visits a man when admiration can't control the object. He will label her cold, difficult, or too much, because the ego names what it cannot own. Yet contempt is only grief in armor, and armor is heavy, he tires beneath it. At night, memory replays small scenes, how she paused before answering, how she declined the half measure, how she refused to treat jealousy like proof of love. These are not grand gestures, but tectonic ones. They shift the ground of his relating from dopamine to discipline. The haunting is geological, not theatrical. Stoic philosophy lives in her habits, she manages her sphere of control and releases the rest. She does not rewrite a man's character with hope, she reads it with pattern. Seneca would approve of her economy, Marcus would recognize her rehearsal of virtue, Epictetus would applaud her refusal to be disturbed by what is not hers. That does not make her invulnerable, it makes her responsible. She honors emotion without converting it into strategy. You, hearing this, may feel the pull to over-explain your standards to be seen as fair. Resist the performance. Standards do not need a press conference, they need consistency. In him, the anima gravitates toward such steadiness because it is thirsty for a home. If his inner feminine has been starved, trained to equate love with adrenaline, then nourishment will initially taste bland. He will miss the spike, mistake peace for boredom, and call reliability predictable. Yet predictability is the soil where devotion grows. The child in him may protest, the man in him is summoned. This is why she becomes mythic in his shadow, she represents the crossing point from entertainment to encounter. To cross, he must integrate. To avoid, he must caricature her. Many choose caricature. That choice does not free them, it freezes them at the developmental line they refuse to step over. Trauma complicates the ritual. Those who learn that closeness precedes harm will scan for danger where there is only depth. Her presence forces the scan to fail, and when the alarm rings without a cause, the mind manufactures one. Stories are invented: she must be hiding something, she must be testing, she must be superior. In truth, she is singular, she refuses to punish him for the past or volunteer to be its repair shop. You, too, are allowed to do this. You are allowed to stop proving that you are not like his ex, his mother, or his wounds. You are allowed to hold the door open without dragging him through. If he dares the work, the haunting transforms from torment to tutelage. He begins shadow work, not as a trend, but as a reckoning. He learns to witness emotion without outsourcing it. He tracks the micro-moments where he postures instead of participates. He notices the way envy and desire blur, and how conquest always dissolves into contempt because the chase is a shield against intimacy. He meets his inner critic, learns its language, and chooses kinder rigor. This is individuation, not the rejection of love, but the refusal to use love as anesthesia. The more he integrates, the less he needs her to symbolize what he has now become capable of living. For her, nothing changes and everything improves. She keeps the rituals that keep her sovereign, quiet mornings that return her attention, friendships that reflect her truth, work that requires her excellence. She dates from fullness instead of hunger, which means chemistry no longer hypnotizes her, and potential no longer recruits her. You may think this sounds lonely, it is not. Loneliness is the absence of self in relationship, solitude is its deepening. She chooses deepening. Those who can meet her are not dazzled, they are devoted. Those who cannot are not enemies, they are detours. The ghost he feels is not aggression, it is invitation. It asks him to become the kind of man who does not need to lose a woman to learn himself. It is an initiation disguised as regret, and regret is the honest twin of aspiration. When he stops trying to exorcise what she represents and starts to embody it, steadiness, clarity, reverence, her figure in the shadow softens. She has done nothing but remain herself. That is the paradox, her greatest power over him is the power she never uses on him. There comes a phase when memory stops behaving like a highlight reel and becomes an inner climate. He moves through ordinary days while a private weather patterns itself around reminders he cannot predict. A street name, a time of day, a sentence phrased with clean edges, each becomes a threshold where he encounters the emblem she left in his psyche. Jung called these living images the imago, a composite of unconscious longing and archetypal meaning. The high-value woman does not become a mere memory, she becomes an interior orientation, the way a compass needle resists false north. He can try to override it with novelty, but novelty only dilutes, it does not recalibrate. He might perform the rituals of forgetting that civilized culture applauds, strategic distractions, performative new relationships, public cheerfulness. Yet performance breaks under the gravity of pattern. What made her unforgettable was not spectacle but structure. She enacted principles instead of moods. She said no without apology, yes without enthusiasm inflation, and goodbye without theatrics. The psyche trusts such coherence. When she exits, the trust remains, and he, accustomed to mistaking intensity for intimacy, is left with a silhouette of steadiness that makes his old appetites feel juvenile. Projection studies him in secret. If he once projected his disowned tenderness onto her and worshipped her for carrying it, he will now project his disowned shame and accuse her of cruelty for refusing to carry him. This is the pivot the ego loves, idealization to indictment. But accusation cannot erase effect. The effect is a new interior standard. You have felt this in your own history, after encountering real alignment, counterfeit tenderness smells like perfume over smoke. You may still be tempted by familiar chaos, but your nervous system remembers the difference between charge and care. Honor that intelligence. Do not betray your body to prove your mind is open. Dreams become tutors. In some dreams, she arrives as a guide dressed in ordinary details, asking simple questions that disarm reflex and expose truth. What are you serving? What are you avoiding? In other dreams, she appears distant, not withholding, simply sovereign. Jung would read this not as punishment but prescription. The anima in dream form invites integration, not possession. When a man chases the figure, he wakes agitated; when he listens to the message, he wakes instructed. Many ignore the message because instruction feels like humility and humility threatens ego supply. But instruction is the threshold of power that does not have to dominate. There is a cost to meeting such a woman while still addicted to conquest. The cost is that conquest loses its taste. He can still win, but winning no longer organizes his meaning. What organizes it is growth, and growth requires patience, confession, and small, private reforms that no audience rewards. This is where Stoic rigor becomes romantic. Control what you consent to, not who you can corner. Attend to the impression within, not the applause without. He who obeys the inner verdict no longer needs to convert a woman into an endorsement. He can love without forcing her to be a trophy, a therapist, or a target. Meanwhile, she lives without proclamation. She understands that neutrality is not numbness, it is calibrated kindness. She answers in time, not in panic. She does not punish with scarcity, she lives with it as a virtue. Scarcity of access, not affection. Scarcity of explanation, not empathy. Her clarity makes room for reality to speak. If reality says no, she does not convene a debate. If reality says maybe, she slows the tempo until truth can declare itself. This tempo confuses those trained on impulsivity. You might be told that patience is manipulation. It is not, when motive is clean. Patience becomes manipulation only when used to provoke insecurity, otherwise, it is respect for causality. The haunting sharpens when he encounters her happiness that is not a performance against him. She does not curate scenes to incite jealousy, she curates a life that remains meaningful in his absence. This difference severs his claim to center stage. He must now locate agency apart from the drama he once administered. If he cannot, he will attempt to audit her joy, interrogate it for signs of betrayal, convince himself that her peace must be a mask. But her peace is not denial, it is the dividend of limits. Limits create reliability. The psyche relaxes in reliable people and aches for them when surrounded by improvisers. You may be tempted to demonstrate softness to reassure the fragile. True softness does not soothe fragility by sacrificing self-respect, it invites maturation by modeling it. Refuse the proud charity of being smaller so another can feel larger. Refuse, also, the counterfeit superiority of stoicism without warmth. The woman who haunts a shadow is not angry at men, she is allied with truth. She can smile and say no. She can grieve without dramatizing departure. She can fall in love and still keep her calendar, rituals, friendships, money, and sleep. When she says she is busy, it is because her life is full, not because she is playing scarcity games. For the man who chooses growth, the pathway is simple though not easy. Observe impulses without obeying them. Separate lust for chaos from longing for depth. Practice continuity, of attention, effort, and word. Let jealousy become a study of what you admire but have not embodied. Replace the performance of vulnerability with the discipline of transparency. The difference is that performance confesses to be comforted, transparency reveals to be accountable. Accountability builds a spine. With a spine, desire is not a storm, it is weather with a forecast. In that atmosphere, her memory is no longer a ghost but a gratitude, the emblem that turned him toward himself. There is a moment in a man's quiet evolution when he realizes that what he feared losing was never the woman's attention but the mirror she held. Without that mirror, the persona can resume its public duties, but the inner court is unruly. The shadow mutters. Complexes jostle for power, entitlement disguised as charm, jealousy dressed as care, bravado wearing grief's coat. The high-value woman once contained these forces by refusing to dance with them. Now, absent the external check, he must build an internal one. This is the sober invitation she leaves behind: become the structure you kept borrowing from her. Jung wrote of the Vimana personality, the aura projected onto figures who seem to carry supernatural authority. When a man encounters a woman of rare alignment, he may grant her mana she never requested. She glows because he lights her with unclaimed qualities: restraint, patience, moral clarity, reverence. If he does not reclaim that light, he will resent her radiance and call it superiority. The antidote is withdrawal, not of affection, but of projection. Withdraw the fantasy that she is the custodial parent of your maturity. Withdraw the myth that her presence will redeem your inconsistency. What remains after withdrawal is work, the sacred kind no audience can expedite. Her sovereignty is practical, not performative. She does not deliver sermons about standards, she lives them inch by inch. When a late-night message arrives, she answers when the sun is up, not to punish, but to keep the body honest about rhythms. When a promise is made, she measures it by pattern, not persuasion. When a boundary is tested, she does not escalate, she concludes. Conclusion is not cruelty, it is the dignity of finality. You are allowed to practice this calibration. You are allowed to make your schedule the sanctuary where self-respect prays. Those who want to meet you will arrive on time. Those who want to manage you will arrive in urgency. Attachment science adds texture to the archetypal frame. Those bonded to chaos will experience her steadiness as deprivation. The dopamine system, trained on roller coasters, misreads level ground as vacuum. But vacuum is only space that has not yet been entrusted with meaning. She entrusts that space to rituals that keep her whole, sleep that isn't bartered for drama, money that isn't lent to buy belonging, friendships that aren't sacrificed to rescue a romance. These modest fidelities are revolutionary. They place reality over fantasy, continuity over spectacle. The psyche relaxes in such terrain, and relaxation is what her absence steals from him most. He longs not just for her touch, but for the climate of coherence she carried. In the wake of this longing, he meets the first honest threshold, envy that has matured into aspiration. Envy says, I want what she has but without the discipline. Aspiration says, I am willing to become the kind of person who can sustain what I admire. Here the Stoics become intimate companions. Epictetus insists on the dichotomy of control, Marcus on the governance of attention, Seneca on the brevity of life and the scandal of squandering it. Under their tutelage, he learns to delay the impulse, finish the task, tell the unsexy truth. The mysterious alchemy occurs, the memory that once stung now steadies. Haunting becomes orientation. She, meanwhile, continues to practice softness with a spine. Softness, for her, is not the waiver of boundaries but the manner of keeping them. She does not humiliate a man for failing to meet her, she simply declines to shrink so that failure can continue uninterrupted. You might be tempted to equate kindness with access. Refuse the confusion. Kindness is a temperature, access is a policy. Keep the temperature warm and the policy discerning. The psyche respects a world where affection is abundant but admission is earned. This is how love stops being a battlefield and becomes a monastery where vows are made to reality first. Jungian individuation reframes romance as a pilgrimage toward the self, not an escape from the self. The high-value woman is not an exit, she is a signpost. She points, sometimes silently, to the work each must do alone. Integrate the dissociated adolescent who equates rejection with annihilation, welcome the grieving lover who mistakes intensity for proof, tame the tyrant king who treats loyalty as tribute. These inner figures, boy, lover, tyrant, are not enemies to be defeated but energies to be consecrated. The lover learns devotion without possession. The king learns service without vanity. The boy grows into a man who can endure boredom long enough for depth to emerge. If you are the woman listening, let resignation masquerading as wisdom fall away. You are not required to harden to be safe, you are required to be clear to be free. Let your no be unadorned and your yes be slow. Hold your standards without rehearsing your pain. Keep mystery, not as a tactic but as a truth. No life can be completely exhibited without being cheapened. The ones meant to join you will not ask you to translate your worth into spectacle. They will learn your language by staying. For the man who finally meets the mirror without flinching, gratitude appears, shy at first, then steady. He thanks the emblem in his shadow for refusing to collude with his smaller self. He no longer needs her presence to behave, he has become the witness he once outsourced. And with that, something miraculous occurs, freedom from obsession. Love becomes possible where compulsion once ruled. In this clarity, reaching out is no longer a bid for repair but an offer of reciprocity. If paths cross again, he arrives as an equal. If they do not, he blesses the distance that trained his depth. There is a quiet threshold where longing changes species. It no longer feeds on fantasy or resentment, it begins to metabolize into wisdom. The man who once tried to outrun the emblem in his shadow now sits with it. He treats memory as scripture, not souvenir. He asks better questions, not, why didn't she choose me, but, where did I abandon myself long before she refused to? His psyche stops bargaining for a different past and starts building a different character. This is the architecture she ushered him toward by refusing to be the scaffolding. Jung would say the self, the center that holds opposites, has stirred, insisting that the boy and the tyrant reconcile into a man capable of devotion without domination. In this maturation, practices replace performances. He keeps promises to his body, sleep that cleans thought, movement that steadies mood, nourishment that does not punish. He keeps promises to his word, agreements he can meet, apologies that include repair, boundaries that neither accuse nor appease. He keeps promises to his attention, fewer spectacles, more pages, fewer notifications, more notes to self. These are not glamorous reforms, yet they are erotic to a nervous system tired of adrenaline. The anima within responds, not with fireworks, but with trust. He discovers that tenderness can be continuous, not just dramatic, that desire can be precise, not just ravenous. The haunting dissolves into a compass. She, on her path, has not been standing still. Sovereignty does not mean stillness, it means unconflicted movement. She keeps her calendar like a vow and her silence like a sanctuary. Work deepens, friendships refine, rituals become charismatic in their own humble way. When romance enters, it must find her life intact, not empty to make space for a savior. She leads with credibility, not charisma, and reads a man by his stewardship of small things. The minimum thrills no living part of her. She is not impressed by speeches or spooked by pauses. She lets reality demonstrate. When reality is kind, she is receptive, when reality is confused, she is patient, when reality is cruel, she is gone. This is where many misunderstand the high-value woman. They mistake her calm for calculation, her mystique for manipulation. In truth, there is nothing to scheme when there is nothing to hide. She has paid for her clarity with old illusions, the illusion that being chosen is proof of worth, the illusion that rescue is romance, the illusion that chaos is chemistry. Without those debts, she can love freely. Love, for her, is a generous allocation of attention to what is true, not a subsidy for what is not. She welcomes devotion but never at the price of dignity. She can be moved, but she cannot be moved against herself. The culture applauds spectacle and equates detachment with cynicism. She chooses a rarer synthesis, open-hearted composure. Her heart is not armored, it is aligned. She initiates without auditioning, asks without begging, releases without scorning. When she speaks of needs, she names them in the language of reality, not threat. When she meets a man whose wounds recruit a nurse instead of a partner, she bows to the truth that mercy without reciprocity is self-harm in silk. Mercy, to be moral, must include the self. For the man who has grown, meeting her again, whether in person or in pattern, becomes an examination without fear. He does not chase approval, he offers congruence. He can hear "no" without converting it into an indictment, yes, without inflating it into a destiny, not yet, without turning it into a campaign. Jealousy, when it visits, is read as a signal about his values, not as a license to control hers. He understands that possession is a poverty of imagination, and that devotion, properly held, is a stewardship of wonder. He blesses the former self that fumbled, he thanks the emblem that educated him by refusing to be consumed. The deeper truth is that remembrance does not always mean return. Sometimes the psyche holds a figure not to reclaim her, but to reclaim oneself. The high-value woman lives in the shadow of many men not because she withholds love, but because she represents it without the bargain of self-erasure. She is a myth only to those who refuse to become real. The antidote to obsession with her is not indifference to women, it is reverence for reality. The man who learns this graduates from hunter to builder, from performer to participant, from collector of beginnings to keeper of continuities. If you are the woman listening, let this be permission to remain luminous without explanation. Let your life be so well tended that romance is an enhancement, not an escape. Keep the music of your mornings, the courage of your no, the humility of your yes, the unteachable rhythm of patience. Refuse to be an argument against yourself. Teach with presence. Decline with peace. Choose with joy. And when a man's shadow begins to calm in your company, do not mistake his quiet for absence, it may be the first honest silence his soul has known. If you are the man listening, let this be the end of exquisite excuses. Integrate the parts that plead and the parts that posture. Build the spine that can carry softness. Practice attention that outlives novelty. Honor the anima not by chasing her projections in other people, but by cultivating her virtues inside your days, receptivity, order, devotion, truth. When you can stand in that weather, you will not need to conquer love to feel powerful. You will be powerful because you can love without conquest. And then the haunting is renamed. It becomes gratitude, orientation, initiation. There is no ghost, only the trace of a standard that refused to collapse. Freedom is not forgetting, freedom is remembering correctly. The story ends not with possession, but with presence, two sovereigns who can kneel to reality and rise to each other without losing themselves. This is the quiet revolution she brings, not men pleading for her attention, but men returning to their depth. In that world, love is not a performance, it is a place to live. When a woman is whole, love is a bonus, not a permission slip.